So I'm Stephanie, again, the local government archaeologist. As I said before, basically I handle any project that's not 106 and not 0505 and not a clearly transportation oversight, not coming down from WSDOT. Pretty much everything else comes to my desk. As I said, I'm not alone. Sydney and Dennis help me out. So sometimes if you're working on a local government project, you'll be talking to them. But as I said, you can always call me and then I can sort out who the best person to talk to is. All right, so my talk today is broken up into two main parts. The first part, I'm going to talk about the two most common laws that trigger archaeological work for local governments. That's SEPA and the Shoreline Management Act, which I'll explain. And then at the end of the talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about working with local government agencies and kind of the special issues and ways to avoid delays in that process. All right, so first of all, who are local governments? So most of the time we're talking about local governments, we're talking about cities, towns, county governments. These are the most common. My desk also deals with state agencies when their projects don't trigger 05 or 106. But we've kind of discussed quite a bit about state agencies, so I'm going to really focus on these, working with these smaller agencies. They can also be local utility districts and things like that as well. So an example of, for instance, if you have a project in Tacoma, then your lead agency is probably City of Tacoma. That's probably your local government agency, but that's only in the city limits. You may have a project that has a street address of Tacoma, but your lead agency may be Pierce County because you're actually in an unincorporated area. So be sure to find out who your actual lead agency is. All right. So as I said, the two laws most likely to trigger Archae reviews are SEPA and Shoreline Management, but there's lots of other local permits that can trigger a review on archaeology. And that trigger is based on local municipal laws. These kinds of permits include grading permits, utility permits, demolition permits, access permits. You know, basically any kind of permit that a local agency can issue, they can trigger themselves the need to review those with archaeology. And which laws get that trigger vary quite a bit from agency to agency. So a lot of these projects are what's called below the SEPA threshold. You'll sometimes get contacted and asked for review. And if they say it's below the SEPA threshold, that means it's too small of a project and SEPA is not going to be required, but they still have archaeology concerns. If they're too small to trigger SEPA, but they're on a shoreline, then you know the shoreline management can kick in. I'll get into that more in a minute. However, I just want to point out lots of projects are not reviewed at all by the DAHP. It is up to these local agencies to decide what they send us for review. So I just wanted to point that out, that we don't have oversight on what they send us. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So let's start with the State Environmental Policy Act. We call it SEPA. It was enacted by the Washington legislature in 1971, mirroring NEPA, which has been enacted in 1969. So Washington acted pretty quickly to have a state-level version of that law. So the goal of this law is to identify environmental impacts likely to result from projects and decisions. And the actions that get triggered by SEPA, that can trigger SEPA, include, as I said, issuing permits for private construction, constructing public facilities, so a local civic center, or adopting regulations, policies, or plans. There's lots of SEPAs that get issued that are called non-project actions, and these are, you know, zoning SEPAs or adopting new codes, and these get reviewed to see if they'll have a major environmental impact also. So outcomes of the review process. So most often there's some change to a proposal to reduce impacts, or the lead agency will apply conditions. And sometimes that condition is you need to do an archaeological survey, or you need an inadvertent discovery plan. Every now and then these proposals get out and out rejected. SEPAs can be rejected. I have only seen that on occasion for really big environmentally impactful things like oil refineries and things. Often enter the SEPA process, get withdrawn from the SEPA process, go back in, get withdrawn. It can happen multiple times. So in general, the goal of SEPA is to minimize impacts, not to avoid them completely. So I should have probably said this first. SEPA is managed by the Washington State Department of Ecology. They have a big website just on SEPA where there's tons of information. Some of the information I'm discussing with you today, it comes from there. They have a State Environmental Policy Act handbook. Here's a cover shot of that. And they also have a helpline. That's really useful if you think the agency you're working with is not actually following the SEPA guidelines accurately. They're good people to talk to. Okay, so the SEPA checklist itself, I get the feeling talking to people that a lot of people have never seen this checklist. So I just have two shots here just showing you what's on this checklist and why it's important. So this checklist kind of initiates the review process, and it contains tons of useful information. The background section is just 2 pages, and it contains basically everything you need to know what laws you need to be worried about on a project. It has the name of the project, and that's the name we will probably be using here at the DAHP. So if you're trying to match up your project with something that we're reviewing, knowing that name is useful. It includes a full description of proposed activities. This is really important even for small private property projects. We often get archaeology reports where they're putting in a new house on a property and the archaeologists dig holes where the house is going. And my question is, well, where are the utilities going? Where's the driveway going? Are they going to put a dock on the property? Are they going to do all these other activities? On the SEPA checklist, there's a full description of all proposed activities are there, so you can see everything that landowner's planning to do. There's also a list of environmental reports prepared, which is very useful. If there's geotech reports, if there's wetlands reports, they'll be listed there, and then you know they exist and you can ask for them. There's also the list of future activities related to the proposal. This is also really important. The future activities may be exempt from review. They may be very small projects. They may be, we're going to put an accessory dwelling on the property, and it might fall below that SEPA threshold. So this might be your only chance to review that. So knowing that they're going to be putting this little accessory dwelling is useful for me as a reviewer, it's useful for tribes as reviewers, and it's also really useful for archaeologists who are planning their project to make sure that that area gets covered in their survey. And then there's also a list of government approvals and permits, which again, if it's going to end up in 106, there may be hints of that in this list of government approvals and permits. It rarely says Section 106, but they might start mentioning the Army Corps or mentioning some other kind of review processes in there, and that can be helpful. Okay, so then the body of the SEPA checklist is these 16 areas of concern. So again, you can see why this would be useful for an archaeologist, not just because of question 13, which is the historic and cultural preservation section, but it also tells you how much ground disturbance there will be, are there shoreline areas, and the transportation and utilities tell you a lot about, how much work is going to happen around those activities. So this is a really useful document for archaeologists in general. And then within question 13, we have 4 questions. I'm showing them to you on 2 slides because they're very long. Some archaeologists sometimes call me and say, the landowner wants me to help them fill out their SEPA checklist. if someone asks you to do that, please do it, because these questions are a little complicated for non-specialists, and people have a lot of trouble filling them in. The first question is basically about buildings and structures. Is there anything older than 45 years old on the property? Is anything on a register of any kind? So I think of that as kind of the built environment question. The second question asked about landmarks and features, specifically notes Indian or historic use or occupation, specifically notes burials, not only cemeteries, but also human burials on their own, and then artifacts. You know, this is, if the landowner has found artifacts on their property, they should report it here. That's not very common, but this is the appropriate place for that information to be put. And then the other two questions, so question C is the methods you use to figure this out. A lot of people say we looked on DAHP Public Wizard website, or they talk to their lead agency about how to fill this out. This is useful, especially useful if they've already done an archaeological survey. This would be a great place to indicate that. And if they had a DAHP project number, this would be the perfect place to put a DAHP project number, because then it would be really easy for me to link up the previous archaeology that was done with this SEPA checklist that I'm reviewing. So if you ever get that opportunity, please put it in there. And then propose measures to avoid, minimize, or compensate. This is kind of either avoid or mitigate area of the checklist. Some counties require that they say they're going to have an inadvertent discovery plan, but a lot of times this is the answer we get for those 4 questions. On the left here, no, no, not applicable, not applicable. That is really the most common answer we get, unfortunately. I mean, I'm okay with that as long as they're being truthful. So on the right is an example of a more complete answer. I mean, maybe good answer is a little over the top, but it at least indicates, you know, they looked at, you know, they did a little bit of research before they filled out their checklist. They're, you know, they don't think there's a historic building. They don't know anything about sites. And then they actually discuss basically a version of an inadvertent discovery plan, and even specifically call out TCPs, which this is the first time I think I've ever seen this. So that's what the questions on the checklist look like for those of you who haven't seen them. And as Lance said, this is a document you need to attach to your permit if it exists. I know we have some trouble with landowners not always wanting to share all their project documents with their archaeologists. So I just want to let the archaeologists know these are publicly available documents. They are, when the CEPA checklist is completed and posted for review, when the review process starts for the CEPA checklist, it's posted on the Department of Ecology's website on something called the CEPA Register. Here's just a screenshot of when I started up the CEPA Register 2 days ago. And City of Arroway Heights project happened to be the first project. If you click on the blue part of the writing, it takes you into the project, and the CEPA checklist and sometimes other project documents are attached. So they're freely available. The CEPA Register is sometimes a little tricky to search, so you have to try a bunch of terms trying to locate it. If you can't find a CEPA checklist and you know it exists, you can also check the lead agency's website. A lot of cities now just post them on their websites, any active projects. And then the DAHP also, you know, if it's already gone out for review, we probably have it, and we're happy to provide you a copy if we can find it in our records. So getting that, I just wanted to emphasize here that getting that checklist can be really useful for project management. Okay, so that's a lot about SEPA. Hopefully that gave you a little information. I'm going to move on really quickly to Shoreline Management Act. I don't have as much to say about this one. It's RCW 90.58 if you like to go and read the legal jargon. Again, this act is an environmental act to prevent the inherent harm in an uncoordinated and piecemeal development of the state's shoreline. So this one was really, focused on protecting shorelines and trying to, the purpose of it was to have a more organized way that these shorelines get developed, theoretically to preserve the environment. Just for your information, the shoreline has a definition of what a shoreline is. It doesn't cover all water bodies. So if you have a project on a water body and you can't figure out why this act hasn't kicked in, it's because it probably doesn't meet one of these requirements. There's a minimum, so all marine waters, but for fresh water, there's a size requirement for the amount of water flowing in the stream, the size of the lake, whether it connects to a wetland or not. So there's a lot of requirements. The important thing for us to know as cultural resource people is the 200-foot rule, and you'll often just hear people say the 200-foot rule. And that means if you're within 200 feet of one of these designated shorelines, that's where the Shoreline Management Act goes into effect. This can actually make things really challenging. You'll have a project where the Shoreline Management Act triggered an archaeological review, but the landowner says only a corner of my house is in the shoreline zone and the rest of my house project is not in the shoreline zone, so I shouldn't have to survey that part. And so obviously the DAHP recommendations are going to be, well, you should survey, everywhere that's going to be impacted by this project that's in a high-risk area for archaeology. If you're having a lot of trouble with the landowner, if you're there's going to be other permits as well for the house that would also trigger a review. So just let the landowner know, this is the shoreline review, but if you don't survey the rest of the property right now, then you're going to have to do a second survey, and that's going to cost you a lot more money. The other point I really want to make is the shoreline management area is not protected from development. I get a lot of reports from archaeologists where they survey a shoreline property, but they stop at the 200-foot mark and don't survey the shoreline area, those last 200 feet, because they assume that the landowner is not going to be able to build there. That is not true. All they have to do is apply for this permit, and I'm sure there are circumstances where these permits get rejected, but basically if you show that you can't do your project without working in this 200-foot area, then it's generally allowed. And so, if part of your project includes a dock, obviously you have to work within the 200-foot zone, and that will go through. So that's just something I want everyone to keep in mind. Okay, so kind of a summary of SEPA and shoreline management. Both of these laws promote finding paths forward for projects. The goal of both of them is to minimize, not eliminate, environmental impacts. So what does this mean for archaeology? The goal is really to promote a good process, which is what Allison talked about earlier for cultural resource law. It's really about the process. Our goal is good tribal and DAHP consultation, and the goal is to minimize or mitigate impact to sites. But again, it's not about stopping projects. All right. So working with local governments, I just have one slide here. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit. I'm not going to go on for too long. Basically, I just wanted to clarify. So when you're dealing with a local government, you're dealing with planners. These are the people who are managing the permits for a given project. There are lots of these planners in bigger agencies, and so you might work with the same county government over and over and work with a different planner every time, which can make your life a little challenging. Smaller agencies may have no planner. I've worked with some small towns where the mayor is in charge of permitting, which must be a little challenging for them. And they sometimes contract out to planning consultants. And so sometimes you'll work with the same planner over and over, and they're not even living in that city. They work for multiple cities. So the reason I'm bringing this up is the smaller the agency, the less likely they have people who know anything about cultural resources. And so they really need our help. And that means help from archaeologists, help from tribes if they have the time and energy, and help from, when a federal agency comes in on a project that's been going through SEPA, the planners can get really confused when suddenly the federal agency takes over the project, the cultural resources part of the project. And sometimes the planning, not local planners, will continue trying to do tribal consultation, which kind of confuses things. So just being really, if you are coming in to take over, a portion of a project, just be really clear to the local planners that you're taking on the responsibility for that tribal consultation now and the DAHP consultation, just to kind of ease their fears. As I said, planners have very little training or access to archaeological data. Some have no access at all. The one thing that the DAHP provides is we have these data share agreements. And in the data share agreement, basically the planning office signs documents agreeing to safeguard, the location of archaeological sites, use it for good and not evil. And then the DAHP provides regular data to them of buffered sites. So they never see the actual location of archaeological sites. They only see the buffered sites. And the goal of those buffered areas is to trigger consultation with these local agencies. So I just want to reiterate again, it's all about, planners need your help. I know it can be frustrating working with lots of different local agencies over and over. And they all have different processes and different knowledge level, but the more we work with them, I think the more archaeological sites we can preserve. And I'm going to stop right there. Allison, you're muted.
Oh, this is me. Okay, so I just want to make a point that you made that's really important that I don't think a lot of people understand. Under the State Environmental Policy Act, there is no requirement to consult with DAHP, none whatsoever. We are the expert agency, so from a litigation standpoint, the question comes in as if a project proponent or a government doesn't consult with DAHP and hits something, are they liable? But the reality is SEPA doesn't require it. So we only see about 40% of all the SEPA reviews that go through the state. It's getting better, but we don't even see half of them. So I just wanted to sort of put that out there. Okay, next.
Great. So we do have a couple questions for you, Stephanie. My private clients don't fill out SEPA checklists well. Is this data now required?
It's very common for people to fill out SEPA checklists poorly. As I said, no, nothing is the most common answer we get. And that's fine if that's their knowledge level when they're filling it out. My concern is when they tell untruths on the SEPA checklist, when they know their house is more than 50 years old and they still say no to is there a building. So that's we don't have high expectations for the SEPA checklist. Obviously, we don't use that as the information for our review, but the more information we can get on those SEPA checklists, the better, I guess is my point, the answer.
Yeah, so, okay. And then one more so far, a record-keeping question. How is DAHP managing records for projects that may enter into the system in a variety of avenues? A given project may have multiple regulatory pathways. FPA, SEPA, 0505 are common co-travelers, for example. Does DAHP staff have a method or process for cross-checking that a project may have been reviewed for additional regulatory processes?
That is an excellent question, and yeah, it's a continuing issue because these projects go through multiple permitting processes, and as they go through the multiple permitting processes, they often change the name of the project. They'll also change the street address will even change, or the tax parcel numbers will change because they're, modifying those as part of the process of building their new, whatever the new thing is they're building. So, we often end up with double or triple project numbers, which obviously is not ideal. I think it's important to know that the SEPA process is always initiated before Section 106 because it's kind of the process that sends people in that direction. So at least for, projects on private property, that's the case. So if you're starting a project and it's a 106 project, it's worth checking with us to see if there's already a project number under SEPA. We do have a lot of trouble with, I'll write a letter under SEPA, requesting a survey, and then they'll also get a letter, that local government agency will also get a letter, about 106, and then they're all confused because they have multiple letters and they're not sure what to do also. So that's why I say just being really open when you're talking to these lead agencies about, this is the step of the process we're in now. We understand you may have received previous correspondence, just being upfront with them about that. But I think this question also gets back to building projects of the DAHP. Definitely you can search the wizard projects to see if the project already exists. We definitely recommend you do that before you start a project. And often, I think part of this question is, we'll have an agency starting 0505 and there's already a SEPA project. Well, as soon as we receive, we don't know there's going to be an 05 project, and so we build a SEPA project when we get a SEPA checklist. So, there's no way to prevent us building that SEPA checklist because it occurs before your project starts. Does that clarify it all?
I think that's the best answer that we can give, Stephanie. I think you did a really good job there.
It's complicated. There is no straightforward process.
Pretty much. Just a lot of open communication.
Yep.
So I think that pretty much covers it. There is a chat happening, or there's a conversation